Catholic Conference, and I'm joined by Jason Atkins, our Executive Director. We're here to give you a recap of what happened at the Capitol this week. It was another busy week filled with monitoring legislation and working on bills. Jason, I know you've had a busy week. Do you want to fill us in on gambling and some of the other stuff you've been working on?
Certainly. So the big conversation, and there was a hearing this week in the House on sports betting. That's a big topic around here. There's a lot of interested parties who want to get a piece of the action and expand gambling, and there's a lot of folks who want sports betting available here in Minnesota. You see all the advertisements on the commercials, on the TV, but it's actually not legal here yet. So there's a bill to expand gambling, but there are a lot of also some serious concerns about what that might be and how that affects families, people with addictive personalities. So there's a lot of concerns about gambling, and one of the big ones is how little revenue will actually be generated for the state by gambling expansion. So we're going to have to deal with the costs of it, but we're not going to really receive the benefits. It's going to be the operators. Whoever they end up being, that's part of the debate. Do the Native American tribes get a monopoly on that? Do the racetracks get a piece of the action? How do the sports teams and the sports venues fit into that? So it's a really difficult conversation and a lot of negotiation. Our role is to simply point out the harmful effects of sports betting and what it might mean for our communities and for our young people, and we're glad to have champions in the legislature such as Senator John Marty to be able to work with to bring those concerns to bear. Our work on that is also being led by our partner organization, the Joint Religious Legislative Coalition, an interfaith advocacy organization for social justice, which comprises the Jewish Community Relations Council, the Islamic Center of Minnesota, the Minnesota Council of Churches, and the Minnesota Catholic Conference. So we're just trying to be that one of those few voices out there, really help encouraging people to push pause on this and really consider these deeper effects and how we could even improve the bill if it does pass to mitigate some of the harms of gambling expansion.
Right, and adding those safeguards can be so important and help, especially our young people and other people who could access this to be able to slow down. So
yeah. On a similar note, we're also working with anti-marijuana advocates on fixes from last year's marijuana bill. So there's already a number of things emerging. There's a new Office of Cannabis Management, but there are a lot of things and issues that have emerged already in which advocates are trying to get the attention of legislators, and we're working with and advising on some of those things as well. So in that gambling and addiction space, we're trying to play a constructive and active role in those conversations.
Right. And another thing that we're working on, we talked about this last week if you saw our video, is the fertility insurance mandate. Maybe you saw the recent court ruling in Alabama that said that the embryos are human persons, and that's generated a lot of conversation both with partners at the Capitol and just on Twitter and around the country. So we are continuing to showcase some of the harms that come from these fertility treatments, try to get partners on board, working through amendments and other strategies if that bill comes up this year.
Yeah, and the Uniform Parentage Act was introduced as well, which introduces legalization of commercial surrogacy. I think it's really incumbent upon the Catholic community to dig in and explore the ways in which assisted reproduction, surrogacy, they're really commodifying the human person, making children for sale and women's wombs for rent. So we like to say this is reproductive trafficking is what it is. It gives people who have the money and the means the opportunity to purchase children. And so this whole universe of assisted reproductive technology, the Uniform Parentage Act, which we're monitoring, these are things that deeply concerning just from the standpoint of how law impacts culture and how we think about the nature of the human person. Are human beings there to be bought and sold? Should they ever be commodified? The answer to that is no, which is why we're also opposing a bill to allegedly restrict the sale of some human remains. So we think at one level the legislators who are bringing this bill forward are doing so with good intent. They want to prevent the sale of bones in oddity shops and skulls and things like that. They rightfully note that these are human beings. That's someone's aunt or uncle, and that's a skull now on a shelf in an oddity shop or an oddities convention, and we should definitely forbid the sale of human remains in any form. Unfortunately, that same bill clarifies, whereas the law wasn't saying anything, that a body broker business, a trade in human remains, can take place as long as it's for what they deem to be a legitimate scientific or educational purpose. And so it's one step forward, but maybe two steps or more steps backwards in clarifying that human remains can be bought and sold. So we're opposing that. We're recommending that It be clarified that human remains, just like organs, can be donated but not bought and sold. Reasonable compensation can be paid for administration, but really we shouldn't be selling human beings or their parts,
Right.
live or dead, in any way, shape, or form. So we're working with legislators in both parties, trying to help them see the challenges of that, and highlighted by a recent Reuters 7-part series on the body trade, which I really would encourage people to Google and check out. Very troubling stuff.
Right, and it's never good to pass legislation that has loopholes like Jason just described. So how can we bring a voice in to close some of those loopholes, or at least bring attention to them at the Capitol?
And that's certainly part of the legislative process too, right, Maggie, in the sense that bills get brought forward and they have to go through a number of committee stops, and part of those committee stops are fleshing out the issues, concerns. A bill might look good on its face, but then upon further inspection, it might create more problems than the ones it's intended to solve.
Right. And another thing we worked on this week was the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Jason, do you want to tell us about your work with Interfaith Partners on that?
So we're leading a coalition of a number of groups as diverse as the Latter-day Saints community, the Islamic Center, the Association of Christian Schools International, to restore religious exemptions in the Human Rights Act for religious organizations and religiously affiliated schools. What happened was that the definition of sexual orientation and gender identity was bifurcated. So now there's a separate definition of gender identity discrimination. But what the legislature didn't do last year was to create a corollary religious exemption. There was currently a religious exemption for religious organizations and schools related to sexual orientation discrimination. They didn't add one for gender identity when they made a new definition. So we're asking, along with this big coalition of faith groups and religious schools, for the legislature to go back and restore that exemption. We're grateful for the support and leadership of Senator Warman Limmer, Representative Harry Niska, Representative Peggy Scott, to bring that legislation forward, and we're encouraging the committee chairs and the relevant committees to hear that legislation and restore that religious exemption for faith-based schools and organizations. Faith-based schools and organizations should be able to hire and choose their ministers according to their mission and values. That's a right protected in federal law and our state constitution. We shouldn't have to go to court to protect that, and that's exactly what that piece of legislation is all about. That's Senate File 3848.
Right, and with all of this work on a number of bills, we always have meetings and conversations with the legislators. Jason and I met with one of the last pro-life Democrat legislators this week and had a fun conversation. And we also met with a number of other legislators to talk through these key issues.
Yeah, Representative Gene Plowski, a Democrat from Winona, retiring after 38 years in the legislature, a legend, has always been a good friend to MCC, and again, one of those the last remaining pro-life Democrat in the State House. So he's retiring after 38 years. We're grateful for his service and his leadership, and he's certainly one of the great personalities around the Capitol who will be missed. And as Maggie said, we're always talking to people and groups and doing things like this to educate the public about what's going on. I had the privilege just yesterday of speaking to the Capitol Page program. Every year, high school juniors come into the Capitol for a week, learn the legislative process, act as pages. That is, just they run errands for legislators on the floor of the House. A great opportunity to get the inside of what goes on at the Capitol, and then they rely on speakers to come in and explain the process. Yesterday, there were 3 of us lobbyists talking about the role lobbyists play in the legislative process. I'd really encourage our families to check out that program. If you've got a current high school junior or students in high school, look into the House of Representatives Capitol Page program going forward. Really a tremendous experience.
Yeah, great. So as you can see, it's been a busy week at the Capitol, both with events, meetings, and working on these key issues. We are always happy to be working on behalf of the common good, be working for our bishops, and we hope you join us next week to hear what that's going to bring at the Capitol. There's always something new coming up.
And as always, you can follow us on social media. Go to our website, mncatholic.org, for more opportunities, our bill tracker. Sign up for our Catholic Advocacy Network action alerts. And again, that's mncatholic.org. Follow us on social media, but it's the best way to stay involved and stay up of what's going on is joining the Catholic Advocacy Network at mncatholic.org, where with a click of the mouse, you can send a message to your legislator about these bills and others that come up this session. Thanks so much for listening. Hope your Lent is going well, and deepening your prayer life and your relationship to Christ through prayer, fasting, and abstinence, and almsgiving, and that you have a blessed weekend.
Thank you.